Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Narrative Podcast. My name's Dan. I am glad you're here today. We've got a great episode for you. Today in the Nonprofit Narrative Podcast, we are all about talking about nonprofits and what's going on. How do you raise funds? How do you engage your audience? How do you tell a great story that makes the whole thing work? And today we're going to talk with Kristin Spiotto. She's the CEO and co-founder of Decoded Strategies. The thing that I love about Kristin is that she takes huge concepts and she can boil it down literally to a sentence like nobody's biz. She does it all the time on LinkedIn. I'm going to drop the links in the show notes. You need to check her out. You need to connect with her. She's really great. And I'm constantly going, did I do that? Am I doing that? What's going on? So we have a great conversation today, and let's just get into it. All right, Kristin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to talk with you because when it comes to strategy and when I think about messaging and I think about large concepts, that you have such a talent for taking this massive thing and just busting it down to a sentence for me. And so that's why you're here, because I know a whole bunch of my listeners are going to be like, oh, thank God. So thank you for being here. Would you do me a favor and just tell me a little bit like your background? I mean, pretty much your whole history up till like 5 minutes ago when we got on this call. No, I'm kidding. Just like, kind of sum up where you're coming from, because your company Decoded Strategies. But if you could give us a background for everybody who doesn't know you as well as I do.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be here, Dan. So yes, I have had a very circuitous career. So I've done a lot of different things that have led me to this point. So I will spare everyone my full resume, but just a little bit of background. So I really got my start early on in ministry, and I was involved in kind of some nonprofit kind of work, and then pivoted into tech. So I worked, which is a weird job, but there's reasons behind it. But even the tech that I worked with was very much speaking and working with the nonprofit community. And it was a fantastic software that had the ability to, like, I truly believe, change the world and help people really organize powerfully. And they could not figure out how to describe what they did. Like, we had 160 employees. If you asked everyone what we did, you got 160 different answers. So I worked there and really struggled with that. And while I was there, I discovered the StoryBrand framework, which is like my bread and butter now. And I learned this way of articulating what you do in a way that people will actually listen. So I began working with them, teaching this framework. And then 2020 launched my own agency to help people apply this framework. So that's really what I do, is to help companies kind of bridge that gap between we have something super cool that is awesome, but people's eyes are glazing over when we talk about it, to actually communicating with audiences in the way that they need to hear it. So that's really what we do now.
Cool. Now, but with your 2020, you decided to launch a business. This was that that sounds like either a terrible idea or did you have the plans pre-COVID, or was it like I launched it February 15th and then the whole world ended?
It was 100% by necessity. So I had contracted with StoryBrand for several years, going on their behalf. They would contract me to go teach their workshops to companies, worked with some incredible folks. And I was doing a lot of traveling. And so I would, come in, drop in for 2 days. And March of 2020 hit. And guess what happened? People stopped booking their workshops. Now, I had always had people after those workshops ask if they could hire me to help them. And I had a big old case of imposter syndrome. Like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't come from a marketing background. I just know this framework really well. So I really struggled with the courage to say, here, you pay me some money to help you with this. And there came a day where I had to do that because no one's traveling for workshops anymore. So I just needed to start saying yes. And luckily at that moment, I had a few people that had asked. So I started baby size. I didn't start thinking I'm going to launch a marketing agency. I just thought, well, I'm going to take on some clients. And yes, I can help them with their messaging and their website. And then it grew way faster than I would have expected. And unfortunately, that fall, one of my dearest friends in the world, Annie Mossbacher, approached me, and we were kind of talking about dreams for the future. And we just sort of began to think, like, what if we go in on this thing together? So she came in and joined, and then we officially launched what is Decoded Strategies in early 2021.
Cool. Excellent. Well, it's great. Like, it's just funny to me how much there's like everyone's life, and then there's that moment, and it's like, so what happened in 2020 for you that's weird? And it's
Oh,
like
yeah.
everybody's got like a crazy story. So it's
Well, it was
really, really
terrifying.
fun,
Yeah, I
whether it's
started a
like,
business by
I launched
accident.
something or something crashed or, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, I want to talk with you. And I was worried about, like, when I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of stuff today, and I actually get a little self-conscious, like, oh, am I doing all of these things? So we're gonna hopefully judge me not too harshly today, because I'm gonna be making notes as well on things that I need to make sure that I'm doing. But I wondered if you might just tell us, like, what's your, when it comes to messaging, and when it comes to, like, our theme for February is strategy and our blueprints and how we're making plans. But what is one thing, just a sidetrack, just 1 second, is just like, what is one of your big pet peeves when it comes to messaging that you see? Like, what's some of those cardinal sins that you see, and you're like, please don't do that, please, everyone. And now I'm
Yeah.
going to hope that I don't do it. So
Well, this is great. And I always I often have my business partner, we give each other kind of flags on, like, hey, you might be doing this a little bit. So we all fall into these traps. But the big things, or the big cardinal sins that I see when it comes to messaging, are confusing your audience. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can look like slipping into insider language or jargon or acronyms. So that's like big mistake number one, is really leading with technical or complicated terms that your audience does not have a frame of reference for. So that's a big one. And the other big cardinal sin, I would say, is making your brand or your nonprofit the hero of the story and making this about you. That's the biggest shift that I always want to come in and make, and talk about who's the true hero of the story, and let's build messaging around that. So I would say confusion, jargon, and then making it about you.
well, do you have any, I think I see that all the time too, so that's really good. But what do you see in terms of, um do you have any good tips on how do you keep it so that we're not, like, preaching and making us the hero when we do our messaging, and we're much more client focused or customer focused or donor focused? How do you make that shift, because it's so slight?
But it is really slight. And so really what I always recommend, like, how to make that shift in your messaging. And the first thing, and this is going to sound so obvious, but it is taking the time to build your brand message, to decide what are the guiding messaging points that we're going to infuse into all of our marketing or all of our messaging and all of our communications. And so I really follow the story brand framework to do that. And so really what that does is we sit down and we first ask the question, who is the hero of this story? Who is this story about? Let's name them. And then let's take the time, and we follow this framework to do it. I won't go through the whole thing, but you really think about, what is it that they want? What problem do they have? And then most importantly, how are you positioning yourself as the guide that they are looking for? So it's really taking the time to build that story and ask these questions that are going to make the story about them, instead of just always wondering. And it's a constant shift that we're making, but really answering those core questions is going to help you make the leap to positioning it about them.
That's great. That's great. So, what do you think when you think about the nonprofit world, though? What is it that is there something that jumps out when, like, what would you say to the listeners right now, like, that they could make a change today? Like, I think that idea of, like, what do they want, what are they trying to do? And I think it's interesting, because when people, most times when I talk to nonprofits, and I'll be like, so what do your donors want? And they'll be like, to give us money. I'm like, no, that's what you want. It's phrased in a wrong way. But like, what is the thing? Like, how do we get to find out what they want?
Yeah. Well, I actually even take a step back. When I think of when I talk to nonprofits, I take a step back on telling that brand message. And we actually do it with the story brand framework. There's a very specific way that we do that with nonprofits, because, you want to tell this story where it's like, who is the hero? What do they want? What problem do they have? How are you their guide? What's the plan that you're giving them? How are you calling them to action? And then what are the stakes in the story? When it comes to nonprofits, I actually usually recommend that you position the hero of the story. It's actually not the donor. It's actually who's the recipient of the services and the products that you're offering. Or not the products, but the recipient of your services. Tell that story and really let them be the hero of the story. And then when it comes to the call to action, that's where you bring in the guide. So if you want to help this, help this group of people thrive, that's where that comes in. So I actually really like when nonprofits tell the story that position the recipients as the hero of the story. and not the victim, which I see a lot. I think you may
A
see that a lot
lot.
too.
Oh,
So it doesn't feel good for anybody. And so I think really letting those folks shine as the hero, and then we're helping them win the day together. So that's kind of a change that I like to see happen
yeah, I
sometimes.
like that. Like, so on the journey, it's the nonprofits on the journey, and the donors on the
Yes.
journey, and as allies. That I like that. I like that a lot. It is funny to me how often the slow piano music and the black and white like
Oh my
photo or video starts
gosh.
coming. There's a big push right now in LA on a housing thing that's going on. I don't know if you've seen it. And I don't want to throw them directly under the bus, but it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad, and I just get frustrated when I see it. So it's funny how it's like, guys, I need you just to take more than 5 minutes and think
Yeah.
about what you're going to do, because your first idea is going to be terrible, and it's
Well,
okay. But
that's,
let's move
I
to the
mean,
next one and the next one.
yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing is I think a big mistake that happens, we're not going to talk about mistakes all day, but people skip to the execution of like, oh, I had this great idea of a video. It's like, well, have you taken a minute to identify what is the main message? What are we trying to tell? Who are we positioning ourselves as the hero of the story? Because then we do slip into, you remember that dog adoption ad with the Sarah McLachlan song? Like we all
Oh
remember
yeah,
that, just sad puppies in
yeah.
cages. Like that is not the zone. So that's actually really why, I mean, I know that you're a pro at helping nonprofits tell their stories. And that's why I like the framework, that using the StoryBread framework, because there's different beats that we want to hit. And we make sure that we get them all, but we don't use them all in equal measure. Because like one of the beats in the StoryBread framework is talking about failure, what's going to happen if we're not successful. And what I see happen a lot is people go so heavy on that. And like failure is like the salt in the
Yes.
recipe. It's not the flour. They make it the
Right.
flour a lot of times, and then we all get real sad and turn the channel. And we don't want that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The craziest part, do you know that I believe that it made like $60 million, that ASPCA ad. That's the tough part, is it's $60 million, and you're like, this is
Yeah.
bad. And everyone's
Yeah.
like, it is bad. But it's like, but I have $60 million now. And you're like,
It,
it's just so sad.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
It's
but you
motivating.
maybe you could have had 100 million though. That's
Yeah.
what I think about. I'm like, could have been 100 million maybe.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and I'd be curious, the long term, was it a big push that happened and they got some results right away? But then what is the long term investment? And I mean, I love ASCPA. I mix those acronyms up. Like I love them. I adopted my dog through them. But like, I think like you can get an early bang for your buck because people are really motivated, and then people turn off eventually. So I would think what's more sustainable, and that might be a way to look at it too.
I'd pay $25 so I don't have to watch it again.
And never hear that song again.
Yeah, that song is totally tainted now. I wonder if it hurt Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah.
That's wild. That's wild. That one, and then the Toy Story 2 song that she has. That
Oh gosh, she's a tearjerker, man. She sure is.
She's good at it. She's good. Well, I think it's really cool that you are, thinking about that. The messaging, like spending time on the idea of like, let's spend some quick time, because I do think that's really fast that people are like, here's what we can do, and they start going visually, and it just starts and off. People are doing bus stop signs, and they're talking about radio ads, and you're like, hold on. Why are we in radio? Why are we doing bus stop ads? Let's just come back to who are we even trying to talk to before we get into all that. How do you think? What do you? I guess when it comes to, in your work, what are some of the misconceptions when people start thinking about planning and messaging that way? What do you think about what are the pitfalls or the swamps that tend to people just careen right into? Is it the execution like that, or are there others?
Pitfall number one is skipping it. And I see that a lot. They think marketing, they think tactics, they jump straight into, okay, we got to get our big, like social selling is the new buzzword right now. So it's like, let's fire up our social selling strategy and let's get this going. And they jump straight into tactics, and they do not take an actual specific time to build their messaging. And so that's number one, is like just skipping it and then thinking like, oh, what's the tone? What's the vibe? We go straight for branding instead of what are the words that we want to be using to talk about our organization or what we do. And so that's the thing that I recommend is like, no, and this isn't like, let's kick it around for a while kind of thing. This is like do a workshop, whether that means just sitting down with an outside facilitator, which I always recommend because we can flag that insider language. You can flag that when sometimes we're so close to our work that we lose track of what's insider and what's not going to land with our audience. So I would say like get a workshop or set aside specific time for your key stakeholders to build that brand message and then make those decisions. Because what happens sometimes too when people don't bring in an outsider to say, okay, this is our decision, moving on to the next one, is they go around in circles and say, let's circle back to this. And it's gray and it's amorphous and you cannot use it. So that's number one, is skipping it. And then number two is not sharing it with the right people in your organization and empowering them to make sure that they're pulling from those threads in the brand story in everything that they do. So we get a lot of siloing, a lot of people talking about things differently. So it's all about like create the message, share it internally, and then make sure that it's the filter that you're using for everything that you communicate about your brand.
Wow. Okay. That's great. That's fantastic. Do you think, I love that, like, it's so important to have that outside voice that it is really funny because I know a lot of organizations, for profit and nonprofit, just think like, no, we can do this. We can do it. It's fine. We'll just do like a 2-day offsite. It's fine. No big deal. I'll lead it. I'm the leader, so I'll lead it. And it's funny to me, as soon as you put somebody else in the room, the dynamics change so drastically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Drastically.
Well, there's a phenomenon that I love just having a name for it called the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge means you are so close to your products or your services or what you offer, you're at like a 10 because you know this inside and out. But when people are making their initial donating decisions, purchasing decisions, they're really kind of operating at a 1 or a 2. We're doing that for a lot of reasons that I won't get into, but people are really making those initial decisions right there. So there's this huge gap. And so we try to simplify it and maybe we get down to like a 6. But there's still a huge gap where we're losing people. So an outside person, it's actually a gift when they don't have the curse of knowledge. I work with clients a lot, and a lot of times they will say, what experience do you have in our industry? And I'll usually say, like, I have some experience here, but I will tell you the greatest benefit I can bring is not being an expert at what you do, because I can help you defeat that curse of knowledge and communicate in the way that your audience actually needs to hear it.
Yeah, it's wild to me. I lost a gig about a year and a half ago because of that. They were like, have you ever worked in this? And I was like, nope, I never have. And they were like, well, we don't think this is a good idea.
Oh,
like,
and they needed your perspective,
yeah,
didn't they?
Yeah,
they did.
Yep.
It's such a gift. Yeah.
I checked back and their next promotion was just like super inside baseball kind of thing. And it was just sad. It made me so sad because I was like, oh guys, because it was a good resource. Like they threw a good chunk of change in things, and it was just kind of a rough thing.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think in terms of how is the technology side of things? I feel like everyone on the nonprofit thing, everyone's just like marching to that beat of like AI is going to change everything, and it is. Like there's no question it is having a massive influence. But it's funny to me, like I don't know how much you've messed around with it, but it's been one of those things that's been really funny. I would say probably like 60 to 70% has been fine. It's lied to me. And told me that things were a certain way, and then it also tends to do like language that is just really like, oh, this is the bot language. This is like, this is not how people normally talk, and it's not how I talk, and it's wild. What are the how do you think that's gonna like just kill us in the next Terminator time?
Dude, I'm a child of the 90s, so I mean I grew up on T2 Judgment Day, so I think everybody should be way more concerned, but we're not going to go into the apocalyptic mode here. From a perspective on really what we're doing and the work that we're doing, AI is simply a force multiplier. That's all it is. It's basically taking the raw materials that are existed and then scaling it up really, really fast. So the issue is, if you start with unclear messaging or you start with garbage or whatever, you're just going to force multiply that up and make a whole lot more of it faster. The challenge that that's creating in terms of messaging and the content that we're creating in the world is all that means is it's creating a ton more noise that we have to cut through. We already had to cut through a noisy market. We already did. And now just multiply that times 100. That's where we're going in the next couple of years. It's going to get harder and harder and harder to be heard as more and more noise is created. So I do use AI. I do use it, but I think about it in terms of AI is only as good as what we're feeding it with. It's only as good as the prompts. So if you're leaning on it to come up with your next big idea, you're abdicating something that is critical and really for you to make the decision on. So when I talk to leaders, and I see it happen all the time in workshops, we'll be brainstorming and also they'll be like, hang on, let me check ChatGPT on this. And I'm like, that is not for ChatGPT. Don't let the internet make that decision for you. That is your decision about how you want to position yourself in the market. So I would say leave what is critical for the humans to do, which is decide on your messaging, how you want to position yourself, how do you want to communicate, And then once you have a razor sharp message, then use AI to really scale that up, but also watch out for that real bot language because we can all see it. We all know.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's wild to me. I just think of it as sand in the sandbox. Like it gives me sand in the sandbox, and
Yes.
then and I can go through it and be like, that's out, that's out, that's out, that's out, that's out.
Yeah.
It's been really funny on the creative writing side because there's its own, it has its own. There's a separate like GPT. I don't know what the deal is, and it's really interesting because I'll just be like, feed it a scene, and then I'll be like, what do you think? And it'll be like, it'll just be super generic. It's
Yeah.
actually hilarious to me. It's like, be careful of how you end things, and it's just like, oh, bots just.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that it's like, especially from a nonprofit perspective of like the humanity of it all, and it's just like immediately like, nope, I don't really there's just not the emotion that
No.
I want there to be. And and especially in terms of like leaving people with something, like what's that feeling we want to leave people with? And
Yeah.
it's just, dude, bye. It's just not really there. It's just like, kind of, how do you feel about nihilism? Like, and
Yeah.
if, if nihilism is your thing, that's fine. But I just think it's really bad if you're for nonprofit messaging.
Yeah. It's certainly not the end all be all, and it's not the end game. I mean, I can't speak to where AI is going to go in the next 20 years. Like, gosh, and the fact is nobody can. And so anybody who does say that, I don't trust them. But I think of it in terms of like, what do I hate doing more than anything? It's the first draft. Like, that's the thing that I'll find an excuse to go change my laundry. I'll find any excuse to procrastinate when it's time to sit down and create the first draft of an email. So if I can use it to give me the bones so that then I can sit down and bring the magic and humanity, and I've started with good messaging, then it's super useful. But if we're just using it to pump out a lot of garbage content, all you're doing is contributing to the problem that you are trying to solve, which is noise in the market and being heard in a noisy market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how terrible that you built your own house of bricks that you can't get over then to
Totally.
get out to everyone. What would you say are some other pieces that you think like nonprofit messaging should make sure that they're including? We talked about the hero. We talked about that because I love to think about it in the hero's journey idea. That just makes life so much easier for me to think about, like the mentor character. I'm worried about the villain. I've got my shapeshifters and my other allies along on this trip with me that are going, which might be partner agencies. They might be the CEO. It might be the volunteer coordinator or something like that. Are there other pieces that you think just have to be included, that every nonprofit should be like, guys, this is really obvious, you should make sure you're including this?
I'm not sure that it's like there's really obvious you should be including this in your messaging, but I would be thinking about, from just a strategic perspective, how once you have your messaging in place, how are you actively delivering value to your audience to grow the relationship with them on a regular basis, so it's not always ask, because that can happen a lot with nonprofits.
Yeah,
it's just like there's
definitely
a lot of ask, and there's reasons for that, and they should be asking. But I would be thinking about, now that you've really established the story that you want to tell, how are you also creating ongoing content that is helping make people's lives better? It's helping people along in their journey. It's serving them in a way that's going to grow that relationship. So I like to think about, how can you be reciprocal, if not necessarily financially with your donors? How can you be really delivering a ton of value that's going to grow demand for the services that you offer?
Now, do you think they should be thinking of it in terms of like the community instead of just like us? Do you think like it's like that we're changing the community? This is the thing that we're working on. We're doing it specifically in this way, but we're also partnering. We have other agencies that we work with, or we have this. I always thought about that. It was interesting that homeless agencies had more to offer than just telling people sad stories. And I think about homelessness, one, because I've worked with a lot here in LA, but it's constantly a thing that we're all thinking about because it's so rampant here in the unhoused situation. Like, is there, does anything jump out at you that way?
Well, the way that I think about it is, in business, when you close the deal, I would say in nonprofits, when you secure the donation, that's like the sale moment. That's like 2 of 10 on the journey. Like, we're taking them along in that story. So I always think about, what is some kind of content that we can produce or share that moves people along to even like a 2 or a 3 on the journey. Like, it's encouraging them along. So whether that's thought leadership on this issue, or whether that's, hey, here's some things that you can do today that can make a difference. At some point, of course, donate and support this organization, but here's some practical things that you can do right now, or practical resources that we want to connect you to. So I just think, like, how are you always moving people along in that journey and giving them resources to help them carry on that are going to bridge the gap to securing funds? So I don't know, but I think I love like tips, tricks, advice, thoughts. Here's what's happening in the world. Anything that's going to make them more of an expert, and share that thought leadership that you have in positioning you as the guide that they're looking for. That's the other thing, is really big time making sure that the nonprofit or the brand is positioning themselves as the Yoda or the Gandalf of the story. And we could talk about how you do that, but that's critical. It's just making sure that you're really confidently stepping into that guide role in all of your messaging.
Yeah. So how do you make sure that I always tell my clients that, you've been around the block. You've been around the block. You know how this works. Like, December isn't a surprise that you're going to try and raise more money in December. It's not going to be a surprise that you're fighting the issue of homelessness on multiple different pieces. So yeah, how do we make sure that we're positioned correctly?
So there are two messaging beats that you want to have in your brand messaging that position you as the guide, and those are empathy and authority. That is always, whenever we watch movies, Dan, I know you're a movie lover. I am a movie lover. Whenever we watch movies, that is the cue for us that, like, oh, this is the guide that we're talking to, because one, they actually have empathy for the hero. They know what they're going through. They may have walked this path at some version in their lives. So they understand what the hero is going through. And then there's authority, which is, and we actually have the competence, the track record to back it up and show that we could be trusted. So that's just almost a hack. I like to say it in a crass way. That's in your messaging, an easy, low lift pivot that you can make to make sure where's the empathy that we're communicating and where's the authority. We got to have both. If you have one without the other, it doesn't work. So that's a really critical shift, and an early shift that nonprofits could make in their messaging.
Gosh, I love that. I love that a lot. Actually, that's pretty fantastic. Because I do often think of the Gandalf thing. He's right behind me here. Because that's just always keep that going. So also, it's just I don't. It's funny. I saw a Lord of the Rings tattoo, and it was a full arm of the whole map. And I sent it to my wife, and I was like, I've never wanted a tattoo more. And she was like, are you serious right now? I was like, yeah. So
have
anyway,
you seen that I have a Hobbit door tattoo on my arm? I have a Hobbit door and the leaf of Lorien. So I'm Lord of the Rings tattooed up. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Wow. All right. Okay. I'm going to send this video immediately to my wife and be like,
yeah,
Kristen's already there. So little sidebar. All right. So what in terms of I think a lot of times when people come into nonprofits and they start talking about messaging, and again, this is a great time of year to start thinking about how that's going to go. A lot of nonprofits start dealing with people who are pretty young in their career and pretty just like, I do think it's hilarious that people, especially on the finance side, will be just like, yeah, just get an intern in there and they can just do all the social media and they can do all the messaging and it's fine. And so then all of a sudden this 23, 24-year-old is being saddled with, okay, now you're going to be the lead dog on, we have to raise $20 million this year, and that's on you. So help me figure this out. And it just like, how is that going to be a thing? So I guess what advice would you give to someone who's early in their career trying to figure out this messaging thing, other than like, go to the library and read all of the books, other than that?
Well, straight up, I love instructions. I'm a firstborn. Like, my husband is a brilliant illustrator, and he can just sit down and come up with like the most creative idea, super creative. I like to say I'm the least creative marketer ever. So if you sit down and say, tell me our next big idea, I'm going to freeze and just slip under my desk and lay down. So I like to follow instructions. I like a step-by-step guide. And so I would say if you have someone who's just starting out in their career, and I talk to a lot of folks who are starting out in marketing, and they get really overwhelmed because there's so much to do. There's so many options. How do they know what to do? That's why I love messaging strategy, because it's very much a repeatable, simple, scalable process to identify what is it that we want to say. So instead of starting with the tagline, and that's what I see happen a lot, is people start with a tagline and they get really excited when they say, okay, our tagline is, you're the first catch. And I think, I don't know what the hell you do. I have no idea what it is that you do and how you make my life better. And I see it a lot. So instead of starting with the tagline, you go back and you do the work of, let me answer the 7 key questions about what we're about. And again, I'm a broken record because I just think this framework is so powerful. But I'd say take the time to build that brand message, because then when you get those 7 key ideas clear, whatever framework you use, Dan, but you get your key ideas clear, you use that, I think, like chords on a guitar. So you got your 7 big ideas locked in, and then any piece of content, collateral, email, speech, whatever, you just decide what chords you want to play. Do you want to talk about problem and plan? Great. You want to talk about what the hero wants and yourself as guide? Great. But you have established. So I say, like, don't try to be too creative. Just follow the steps to create that clear brand story, and then use that as a jumping off point to get really creative once you have the bones in place.
Yes, I can definitely vouch that Joey's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable at his work. I love it so much. I have it, where is it? Oh, I have the fireflies up there.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, and he signed it, so
fancy.
even better. Yeah. Then yeah, so that, I think that's a really great way to play. Also, music's really popular in my house, so the idea of like you're going to take a few things, you're going to chord it together, I think is a really good thing. And it doesn't. Do you find that the simpler it is, the better? Like that it doesn't have to be. I feel like so many people try to be clever. Like I'm going to be so clever right now, and I feel like that drives message to the ground like really fast.
It's all about what you start with. So if you start with, I'm going to be funny, I'm going to be clever, I'm going to be it's going to be a tearjerker, I'm going to be moving. If you start with that, then you really risk confusion. You really do. And it can be super funny, but no one have any idea what you do. We're going to see that in the Super Bowl commercials really soon. We're going to see people that pay $1 billion to make people laugh and won't have any idea what they sell. So I would say it's all about what you start with. So you have to start with simplicity and clarity in your brand message. Once you have that, you got your foundation of the house in place, then you can have fun with it. You can iterate with it. You can you tell that story in a really clever, cool, funny, moving way, however you want, but you have the right foundation. If you just start with clever, you got a really shaky foundation, and it's not going to be backed by clarity. So that's really all about prioritization, where you're thinking about strategy. If you've been sat in a seat and said, we need you to raise $20 million, well, first thing, I hope that they talk to you, Dan. But say you're overwhelmed with it, the first thing to do is get yourself on solid ground with clear and simple messaging, and then you can make it sound really great.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk honestly of like, hey, if you get stuck, go back to your mission statement, and they'll be like, oh, that actually doesn't help me because it's full of jargon, or it's full of like the longest run-on sentence ever put together, and they'll be like, yeah, we spent how many thousands of dollars to have somebody come in and help us do that. And then it's like, oh
yeah,
goodness, it just.
Well, what I love about prioritizing a strong brand message, and I mean literally create it and like tape it in front of, like, next to your computer. I mean, like, look at it all the time, because that then kills what the phenomenon that drives me nuts more than anything, which is blank page syndrome. Blank page syndrome is sit down and write an email and just looking at it, you see the cursor, what do I say? So when you have your brand message in place, you don't have to worry about that, because you can just pull from those ideas and then branch off with it. So it's really helpful to kind of push past that moment of paralysis and then begin creating something that actually works.
Yeah, another one for me is also thinking about those avatars of like who you're going to be talking to, because that email thing. Oh, do you find that as well?
Oh yeah, well, I think that's why I always we have like 20 different brand scripts in our business, because you create your overall brand message and then you create your subplots. So like we were talking about Lord of the Rings earlier, that's a very clear overall plot. Bad ring, Mordor, got to get it there. Right. So there it is. Right. But under that, you have all of these subplots that are fueling that narrative. So if you have Legolas and Gimli over here, you got Pippin over here, all of that movement and all of those sub stories are pushing this big story forward. So from a brand messaging perspective, we say, get your overall brand message dialed in, and then identify your key personas that you need to target and answer those same questions about them. So now you're talking to them in a really relevant and targeted way, but it pulls from your overall story. So you're making music instead of noise. It makes sense and it's cohesive.
Excellent. I love it. Now, when you start thinking about, because I don't know what you do for like end of the year, first of the year, like on a personal level, like trying to figure out what your plans are. And like my wife and I sat down and it's, we've been married it'll be 7 years this year. And it's funny that we sit down, and if we don't go over goals together, like what we're trying to do, if we wait too long, that it'll be like, I don't understand what are we working on, kind of thing. Do you have any kind of any kind of way that you like think like, this is how I'm going to put together my own personal move, whether it's with my business, which is the nonprofit, say I'm doing messaging, the nonprofit, but also for my career, or also for, what's going on at home. Cause that work-life balance is, people are so much louder about it right now than they used to be, which I think is great. I actually think it's, maybe it isn't cool that you got 4 hours sleep for a week and you did nothing but work for 80 hours. It's funny how, like, in my 20s, I was like, that was great. But now I'm like, don't do that. You're
No,
going to die.
no.
It's such a terrible thing. So is there anything that you would approach when problem solving, or going from something like on a personal level?
I can't say that we do that good of a job. I'm very actually inspired by hearing about you and your wife talk about your shared goals for the year, because I don't think we have little kids, and we are very reactive in our life of what it means to navigate life at home. So I can't. I mean, I do my own personal, of course, every year. I don't do big New Year's resolutions anymore, because I really practice atomic habits. So I've been
Yes.
I've been flowing with that for a couple of years. If anyone hasn't read that book, highly recommend it. It's pretty incredible. So I don't do a huge recalibration personally every year, because I'm trying to kind of create some continuity there. However, from a business perspective, absolutely. Every December, we sit down and we take a look at our metrics for the year. We look at what are our close rates, what are our, what are the deal sizes, who are we helping? We get into the nitty gritty on those numbers, and then we develop our OKRs and really like, what are the actual strategic moves that we're going to make to close those gaps to where we want to go. So it's clarity. I mean, this is not rocket science on strategy, but it's like, where are the gaps? Where do we want to go? And what do we really believe? What are the meaningful changes that are going to make that? So I'd say we do that better from a business perspective than I do from a personal perspective on the big changes at the beginning of the year.
Well, I mean, I totally understand. Like my kids, I've got one in college and one getting ready to go. And so it's a whole different, it's funny how you get good at the stage that then they leave. And then I'm like, I am really decent at talking to high school kids right now, but I have one high school kid of 3, so they're getting ready to begin. It's just like
the rules of the game change as soon as you learn them.
Every time.
Totally.
Every time.
Totally.
It's so nuts. But it's a wild thing. I think one of the things you just brought up is like, we don't take the time a lot of times to be critical and look at things and what they did, because I can't tell you how many times I'm talking with a client and they'll be just like, sorry, I didn't get back to you. It's really crazy right now, but it's really crazy right now forever. And so there's never a time that it isn't crazy. So how do you think it is best to block out that time to be able to, because you have to do 2 things, right? You have to call some data, and then you also have to block out the time to mentally go, okay, I'm going to do this and nothing else, and I'm going to throw my phone away so I don't get distracted. What do you throw your phone away during the day, like to get stuff done?
Well, what I do is I turn off Slack. That's the big thing that I do, is like, sometimes I'll just say, I'll tell our team, like, I'm closing Slack for the next 3 hours because I have to write this. So I absolutely try to turn off whatever distractions are occurring. So I would say, and there's like one more piece in the looking back and seeing what happened, which I have found requires a little bit of personal courage that I have to like muster up sometimes, because, and my business partner, Annie, she's the most beautiful, incredible strategic thinker I've ever met. And so she does the incredible work of really looking back at these numbers and seeing what we've been done. And when we sit down, I always have to take a moment to say, all right, let's look at this with open hearts and open eyes. And as we're looking at the learnings and the opportunities, that doesn't reflect on who I am as a human necessarily. So that's just like a little bit of personal, like, there has to be some vulnerability and a willingness to say, let's look at it together, and then let's see, and let's detach from it to a certain extent, and then make the changes that need to be made. So that's the other piece I would say, is if there's a ruthless look at what's happened and a willingness to change things strategically, it has to be a little bit ruthless with love and courage as well.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's really good. You mentioned James Clear and the Atomic Habits, which, gosh, what an easier framework to start saying like, oh, I need to add that, instead of like willpower forever. Because that was like, it's amazing how, when I think about like, I'm brushing my teeth, what's that next thing? It is so funny how it's it's a lot easier. It's just a lot easier. I just can't, the guy's brilliant. I don't understand where he came up with that idea. But
no, it's brilliant.
Is there something else in terms of just say messaging or maybe something that you're inspired by book wise that we could check out?
Oh gosh. Well, this is a tough one. Right now I'm reading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And so that's one
Ooh.
even just right now that I'm really that's a faith-based book, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really powerful in terms of how we live our lives, because you were just talking about like it's always going to be crazy. It's always going to
Yeah.
be like that if we let it be like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one that I'm currently inspired by is the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
And that's John Mark Comer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I read that last year. That was
It's
very
great.
good.
It's great.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad that I got to talk with you today, and thank you so much for your time. And is there any last thing that so I want to work with you because you sound super smart and you've answered so many questions. How do we go about finding you on the internet and talking to Decoded Strategies?
Great. Well, we're at decodedstrategies.com. And so absolutely there's a link there to schedule a call if you want to talk about your messaging, or you just want to talk about your nonprofit and what you're trying to accomplish. Happy to schedule a call. I'm also on LinkedIn and try to share a lot of content on a regular basis. It's really bite-sized to help people that are interested in messaging and interested in applying that to their nonprofits and their business. So I would say either check out our website or follow me on LinkedIn. Let's connect on LinkedIn. And that's a good way to stay in touch as well.
That's great, and I definitely check out your stuff on LinkedIn pretty much every time I come on the platform because it's usually sitting there for me, and I love it. It's such good, key, quick stuff, and like to the point that I'm like, am I doing that? Like I always am. I second guess, like, am I? There's. It's just such a funny thing to be like, I'm a communication professional, and then you're like, what did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? And
Well,
it's
it's so
like I was
easy. Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It is. There's like a million things to worry about, so it is so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yes,
we, even at our business, we're experts in this, and we bring in an outside perspective to help us. If we're really creating a high stakes brand script or we need some help, we bring in an outsider to help us with this, because it's so easy to get caught up in cursive knowledge and all that kind of insider language. So it's hard to do all the time, but it's a really powerful shift that you can make in your
I
messaging.
love it. I love it. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for being here. And thank you to Kristen for dropping some serious knowledge on us. If you want to connect with Kristen, go to decodedstrategies.com, connect with her on LinkedIn. I'll put all those links in the show notes so you can check it out. If you want to connect with me, you can email me, Dan@Portnoy Media, or you can just connect with me on social media. It's everywhere, and I'll put the links in the show notes. So that'd be great. The other thing is, if you want to get any free resources, we've got them at portnoymedia.com /resources, and you just put in what you want and you can get it out. Things that are there now: how to make your email work super well, how to make the best welcome video, and if you really want to help us actually with the podcast, go to iTunes or wherever you listen to it and give it a star rating and leave a review or share it with someone you know. Okay, that's it for us here. I'm Dan Portnoy. Have a great one. Rooting for you. Take care.